Good morning. We're learning Sicha Aleph and Chaye Sara, Chelek Chaf. And we're learning in the schus of all of the shvuyim, all of those who are abducted should be returned to their homes safely in mind and body. And all those who need a refuah shalema should be granted a refuah shalema miyad. And Hashem should have Rahmanas on us and send us a nes, and there should be just a nes, that we don't care what it looks like. Also learning in the schus of refuah shalema for Rav Yosef Yitzchak ben Sima Chasya. And we are learning in honor of great simchas, Orit grandson's bar mitzvah, Chani Rappaport's new granddaughter, Chaye Mushka, the bat mitzvah of Mashi Torag's granddaughter, Golda Rachel Heisman, and Chana Man's grandson got engaged. His name is Menachem Mendel, to Sara Leah Brennan. Mazel Tov, Kili Yerbo, there should only be only simchas. Chaye Sara, Aleph, Chelek Chaf. The Parsha Seinu, Meidienu HaKosov, Esach Shnois Chaye Sara, Avraham v'Yishmael. Our Parsha informs us of the years that Sarah lived, Avraham lived, and Yishmael lived. B'tchilas HaParsha, at the very, very beginning, Vayiyu Chaye Sara Mea Shana v'Estrim Shana v'Sheva Shanim. We learn that Sarah lived 100 years, 20 years, and 7 years. Ubesiyam HaParsha, and at the very end, Ve'ela Yemei Shnei Chaye Avraham, and we learned that Avraham lived Mea Shana v'Shivim Shana v'Chamesh Shanim. 100 years and 70 years and 5 years. And we also learn internally in our Parsha, Ve'ela Shnei Chaye Yishmael, and these are the years of Yishmael's life, Mea Shana, V'Shloshim Shana, V'Sheva Shanim. He lived 100 years, 30 years, and 7 years. Umatzinu Bazeh Dvar Pela Perish Rashi Ala Torah. And regarding these three psukim and their content, we find something unusual in Rashi. Av shebechol hagimel nemar shana oishanim bechol mispar. Although in each one of these psukim it says shana or shanim after each value, after the hundreds, after the tens, and after the single digits, hein b'meya, hein ba'asares, v'hein b'yechides, harei beferish Rashi matinu chiluk b'chol echad mehem. But in Rashi's commentary, he treats each one of these three instances differently. In other words, although we have the same thing in the pasuk, but Rashi does not mirror this consistency in his commentary, and his commentary is different in each case. Bishnai Sara Piresh, when Rashi comments on Sarah's years, he comments Lekach nechtav shana b'chol klal uklal. This is why the word shana is written. It seems to be extraneous to write shana 3 times in this pasuk, but it's written after each value. Loimar lecha, to tell you, shekol echad nidrash la'atzmai, that each one of these has to be expounded upon independently for us to cull all the lessons that the pasuk wants to teach. Umizel lamanu, and so we learn from this that Bas Kuf, when she was 100 years old, she was kivas chaf lechet. She was as free of sin as when she was 20. Ubas chaf kivas zayin liyofi. And when she was 20, her beauty was like that of a 7-year-old. That's Rashi's commentary on Sarah. Ba'Avram, when it comes to Avram, Rashi does something different. He writes, Kasav Rashi, ben kuf kiven ayin, uben ayin kiven hey beloy chet. When he was 100, he was like 70. And when he was like 70, he was like 5 in terms of being free of any transgressions. So it seems, v'kavanasai v'pashtos. So it seems that his simple intention is to teach us. Shalamadu mikan, we learn from here, Deloy kibesara shekol echad nidrash la'atzmai v'lamadnu beis inyanim that in the case of Avraham, It's not like by Sara that each time it says Shana, it is expounded upon separately, and we learn two things. We learn about her being bereft of sin and also about her beauty. But here by Avram, Rak Inyan Umayla Echad, we learn only one great characteristic. She'af b'Yosef ben Kuf haya Avram kiven ayin, uven ayin kiven hey beloichet. That even when he was 100, he was like when he was 70, and when he was like 70, he was like he was 5 without any sin at all. V'ilu gabe Yishmael, and in the third instance, when it comes to Yishmael, loy perish Rashi klal. Rashi does not explain anything. Mipnei ma nechtav shana b'chol klal u'klal. He doesn't even relate to the fact that it says shana after each value. And the Rebbe says, "V'hinei mefarshei Rashi ha'arichu harbe b'shakla b'tarya liyashiv hashinuyim hanal b'divrei Rashi." The super commentaries on Rashi go back and forth in trying to analyze and explain why it is that Rashi changes from one pasuk to another. Aval noisav al akshoyim hashonim shebechol echad min hatirutim she'ein kan hamokim laharach bazeh. But the Rebbe says, but in addition to the deficits in each one of these arguments that they set forth, and this is not the time to analyze the different arguments and what they say, the Rebbe says there's a more basic question. But there is a general and underpinning question, as stated many times, and that is, we see that there's something going on here that is not simple, because we always learn that Rashi is consistent. And here, even in one parsha, there's such blatant inconsistency. So, in addition to the fact that this is kind of surprising, because every way that these different super commentaries want to explain this way, Rashi could have adopted those explanations. But here's the issue. But Rashi's stated mandate is to explain the pshat of the pasuk so that it is understood even to the 5-year-old. Lichtayv perushoi ba'ofen boror, to write out his commentary in a clear way, in a way where there are no doubts about what it is that he intends. And since there are doubts, which calls forth so many commentaries to each to offer their explanation, and so we're forced to say, shekavanas Rashi, that what Rashi intends to teach here, muvenes bibira nilshainai b'perushay ve'ein sarech lahisif al zeh me'uma. So we have to explain, we have to resort to understanding this, that it is clear, even if it's not at first blush apparent, but it is clear what Rashi is trying to say, and luckily the Rebbe explains how clear it is. V'habir bazeh. An explanation is as follows. Midivrei Rashi gabe Sara. When we look at what Rashi writes on Sara's years, again, lekach nechtav shana bechol klal uklal. This is why it says shana after each value. Loimar lecha shekol echad nidrash la'atzmai. To tell you that each one has to be expounded separately. Hainu, this means. Shemizeh shenichtav shana bechol klal uklal muchach shekol echad nidrash la'atzmai l'cheit liyofi. From this rule that the word shana written after each value means that each one of these numbers has to be expounded separately, move on me'atzmai, so it's self-understood, shegam lahalon gabe Avraham, shegam boi nechtav shana bechol klal uklal, v'hechrach shekol klal nidrash la'atzmai, v'nilmadim mizeh beis inyanim. So first of all, the Rebbe says, when Rashi gives us this rule, when he comments on Sara's years, we have to take that rule and apply it in each case that comes afterwards. And we don't expect Rashi to repeat this because that would be the soft bias of lower expectations. And Rashi expects that we remember what he said, especially if it's in the same parsha. So Rashi already told us that whenever the Torah says shana, shana, or shanim, you have to understand each value by itself. Umemela move on. And so once we take this as our default understanding, so it's understood, Shedivrei Rashi Ides Avram ben Kufke ben Ayin. So what Rashi is saying when he says that Avraham was at 100, like he was at 70, Perusham loirak haschalas halimud shesiyumay ben Ayin keven hey. We have to understand this not just that at 100 he was at 70, and at 70 he was like 5, he never sinned. And so it's a mistake to think that Rashi is just teaching us one thing about Avram. Ella haisefes oid. But rather, what Rashi is teaching here is an additional limud b'fnei atzma. It's an additional teaching in and of itself. And why doesn't Rashi tell us in full-throated manner in which way was Avram at 70 the way he was at 100? The reason why Rashi doesn't include it in his commentary is because that part of it, that he was at 100 like he was at 70, is written clearly and explicitly in the psukim of the Torah, where Kasher Tiach HaKadosh Baruch Hu LaAvraham sheyivoled lo ben misara, when Hashem promised Avraham that he was going to have a child from Sara, Ksiv, the pasuk says, Vayomer b'libai, Avram said in his heart, Halaven meya shana yivoled. I'm going to have a child at 100. Hainu shetama Avram ech yuchal lohelid ben begil meya shana. We see from this that Avram wondered, how would he be able to have a child at 100? Ukiperish Rashi Sham, and Rashi there tells us that b'mei Avraham nismatu hashanim kvar, that in the days of Avram we see that people were living shorter. They weren't living the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years of prior generations. Uba tashus koyach ba'ilam, people were weakened, and therefore shemiru todasein b'nei samachu b'nei ayin. They hurried, they wanted to beat the biological clock, and they hurried to have children at 60 or 70 years old. So based on this information that Rashi gave us there in Lech Lecha already, it's understood b'pashtus. It's understood simply hataycha de ben kufke ben ayin. What Rashi is saying when he says that Avram was at 100 as he was at 70. That although at that time, because of the general weakening of people, people were able to have children only until 70 years old. But this general, global, universal weakening never touched Avram. This is proven from the fact that he fathered Avram, Yishmael, when he was 86. And therefore we understand ben Kuf, that although he was 100, he remained strong and able to father children and presumably to function in every other way as if he was only 70. And through this, we will better understand what Rashi says on the words that Avram says, will I be able to have a child at 100? Shezehu loit mia ech yitachin sheyivoled lo ben begil mea shana. Elat mia kayemes. He's not questioning how is it possible that he will have a child at 100, but rather it's an ongoing wonder. Amar beliboy Do I really deserve? In other words, he never doubted Hashem's capability. He doubted his own ongoing worthiness to have yet this sin occur to him after everything else. Masha in King Sara, but in contradistinction when it came to Sara, but since the pasuk says clearly that Sarah ceased to have her menstrual cycle, she had gone into menopause. So naturally, this obviates the possibility of her having children. And so unlike by Avram, by Sarah, there was an absolute necessity for there to be a miracle. As it says, Hashem davar. Is there anything that's impossible for Hashem? Which implies that there has to be a miracle, but for Hashem, that's no big deal. So for her, there had to be a miracle, that Yitzchak should be born to her. Ella, Shesara Savra Shagam Avram in a Yachal. But Sarah thought that her husband too was unable to father a child, as it says, Batitzchak Sarah. Sarah laughed and said, Acharei baloisi, after I have withered, meaning I have gotten old, I have gone through menopause, Va'adaini zaken, and my husband is also old. Va'al pizeh, and once we understand the difference between Avraham and Sarah vis-a-vis the necessary miracle or lack thereof in their parenting, their conceiving Yitzchak rather, al pizeh, based on this distinction, yesh l'taretz oid kushya gedola. We can now also explain another big question. Madua ein Rashi mevar beperushay es maaseh haledes b'nei ketura. Why does Rashi remain silent on the conception and birth of the children that Avram had with Keturah, who is Hagar? This is more than 40 years later after Yitzchak is born, and yet Rashi doesn't comment. Rashi doesn't say that this was a miracle. Because Rashi has already addressed that in our Rashi that we're looking at now, that at 100, Avram was a 70. Hainu meaning, she'etel Avram loy haisa tashus koyach shegbila es ha'ilada ad gil ayin. That regarding Avram, there was no weakening of his physical status, and there was no limitation. He was not limited in being able to father children only until the age of 70. Lefi shaloi haisa le'inyan tashus koyach kol shlita alav. Because the weakening of all of the other people at this time had no bearing on him. It did not affect him at all. And therefore he was able to be the father of a child at 100 years and much later than that. Just as we understand when Rashi says without sin. Although Rashi says that at 70 he was without sin just as he was at 5, we don't understand this. Oh, when he turned 75, then he was sinful. No, there's no statute of limitations. So just as he remained all of his life without sin, so too did he remain in his full physical strength capacity until the end of his days. Gimel. And again, based on this distinction between Avram and Sarah, that Avram never needed a miracle in order to conceive a child, but Sarah did. We can better understand differences in Rashi's commentary on further psukim. Ala pasuk heinika banim Sara, on the famous words that Sarah breastfed children. but she only had one biological child. So who are the banim? Perish Rashi. Rashi explains, B'yayim HaMishnah, that Sarah made a big party. Heviu hasaras is b'neihen imohen ve'nika isam. So the important women of that time brought their children, and Sarah breastfed their children. Why? Shahayu Imres, because they used to say, Lo yolda Sarah, el asufi hevia min hashuk. Sarah never conceived, she never gestated, she never birthed this child. She found some child that was abandoned somewhere and brought this child into her home from the marketplace and is passing it off as her biological child. So that's vis-a-vis Sarah. V'hinei ala pasuk b'tchilas parshas Toilus. But regarding Avraham and Yitzchak, we find in the very first pasuk in Parshas Toilus, it says, Avraham ha'iled es Yitzchak. And these words are completely extra because the pasuk tells us before this that Yitzchak is ben Avraham. Kasav Rashi explains, why does the pasuk repeat this? Lefi shahayu leitzani hadar oimrim me'avimelech nis'abra Sarah. The scoffers, the riffraff of that time said, Sarah got pregnant from Avimelech. Avram's not the father of this child. Ma asa kadosh baruch hu. So what did God do to, disabuse people of saying that? Sar chulu, he fashioned Yitzchak in the likeness of Avraham. Veheidu hakol Avram ha'ilidus Yitzchak. And seeing that Yitzchak was a carbon copy of Avraham, they all had to admit that Avraham was the father of Yitzchak. So there are a number of distinctions here. They don't really parallel each other. B'tzarech lahavin. Mipnei ma le'inyan Sara kasav Rashi sahasorais nashim chashuvos hein she'amru lo yolda Sara. By Sara, Rashi says that it was the creme de la creme, the upper crust of the generation, the important women that said, nah, it can't be Sarah's child. V'ilu b'negei Avraham, but when it comes to Avraham, perish hayu leitzanei hadar oimrim avimelech nis'abra Sarah. But vis-a-vis Avraham, Rashi says it was only the scoffers, the lowlifes, the people who don't want to be confused with facts, where we are only too aware of this demographic today. So why this distinction between Avram and Sarah? V'oid eina muvan. And another thing, ma shehinika banim Sarah, harei ze bira rak sheyolda Sarah. That hayeled eina yasufi, aval ein zuraya shu ben Avraham. But what Rashi tells us about that Sarah breastfed children just explains that Sarah is the child. But how is this a proof on Avram being the father? Ve'im kain, and so therefore, being that this is only a proof on her, because only a woman who had gone through conception and gestation and parturition could lactate in that form. So they could have still said, these sarais, these important women, that Avram is the father. Because they knew that Avram was 100. And if he's 100, how is he fathering a child? And actually, the question is greater. The wonder is greater. Because because Rashi is basing his commentary in the Gemara. And in the Gemara, both of these teachings, what Rashi says about Avram and what Rashi says about Sarah, are brought down in one continuum. Heinika banim Sarah, how you call umas ha'olam meraninim. And the words Heinika banim Sarah, that Sarah breastfed children, the Gemara says that all the nations were scoffing, they were mocking, shehiviu asufi min hashuk, that this couple brought an abandoned child from the marketplace. Avram Avinu halach v'ziman kol gedolei hadar. Avram Avinu went and he invited all the great people of that generation. And Sarah invited their wives. And she nursed all their children. And still these people mocked and scoffed, and they said, Im Sara habas tishim shana teled Avram ben mea shanim yelid. Just because we're now convinced that Sarah was able to have a child at 90, that means that Avram was able to have a child at 100. Miyad nehefa klaster panim shel Yitzchak. Immediately, Hashem changed the countenance of Yitzchak, changed the way he looked to reflect the fact that he was Avram's biological child. So the Gemara gives it to us this way. Rashi changes, you could see, many words. Rashi divides it in two, and Rashi says that regarding Avram Avinu, it was the scoffers. By Sarah, it was presumably the more important women, have a higher level of cognition, more refinement, and so on and so forth. And they are the ones that are pushing back. But the Rebbe explains, now we can understand why Rashi rejects the Gemara's thesis that all the nations were scoffing, not just the lowlifes, not just the riffraff. Because hachidush v'hatzmiya be'enei hasaras haya milichatchila rak b'negei l'sara. Because really the novelty and the wonder in the eyes of the important women was from the beginning only regarding Sarah. Why were they not wondering about Avram? Because regarding her, she clearly went through menopause. So it's not possible for her to conceive a child and gestate and so on and so forth. Avram, but a contradistinction in regards to Avram, they witnessed that he had a child at 86 years old. So if he can have a kid at 86, he can have a child at 100. And therefore, in the eyes of the, let's just say, more refined, smarter, more important people, although we've learned that more important doesn't mean you're smarter, but let's say in those days there was a correlation. There was no wonder about Avram having Yitzchak. It was only the scoffers, the riffraff, the unmentionable phrase, these are people that are not interested in the truth. They do not want to be confused with the facts. And they're only looking for things to scoff at. So was this demographic from their place of just wanting to scoff and not take into account the facts? They were the ones that said Sarah got pregnant from Avimelech. Ella, but Hashem wanted to completely obviate even the words that were being said by this demographic. And therefore Hashem made that Yitzchak should look like a carbon copy of Avram. And so everyone had to admit, even these scoffers, that Avram was the father of Yitzchak. And it would be nice if we had a really big nest like this now, and everybody would have to admit what is true and what isn't. V'hatam shlei pirish Rashi legabe Yishmael. So now that we've explained what happened in Rashi's Perush, why does he digress from what he did by Sarah? because he doesn't have to repeat, because he already taught us what it means when it says Shana, Shana, or Shanim. And also, he doesn't have to tell us in which way Avraham is the same at 70 as he is at 100, because the Torah is telling us the way in which Avraham's physical strength and capabilities are in no way diminished. And then the Rebbe kind of continued to explain some things about the differences in Rashi regarding Avraham and Sara, and how their parenthood was proven. Now the Rebbe is going to address what Rashi does regarding Yishmael. V'hatam shalei pirish Rashi legabe Yishmael ben Kof kiven Lamed or ben Lamed kiven Zayin. And why doesn't Rashi mirror what he did earlier by the other two? Even though by Yishmael it says also Shana or Shanim after each value. But why doesn't Rashi do it here? Because again, it's self-understood.
Yeah.
Rashi taught us a rule, and we need to be consistent with it. Lefi perish Rashi zeh ubehemshech Lavram ben Kuf kiven Lamed leloy tashas kayach uven Lamed kiven Zayin lechet she'asa tshuva umashmienu bezeh kasav Chaye ze kvar migimel Lamed shana. Just like what Rashi told us about Avram, we need to import it here about Yishmael, that he was at 30 like he was at 100, and he was at 100 like he was at 30, and he was at 30 like he was at 7, meaning that at 100 he was as strong as he was at 30, and at 30 Yishmael was as bereft of sin as he was at 7, meaning the pasuk is teaching us that he did teshuvah already from 30 years of age. Ella. But al pizet tzarich lahavin is pirish Rashi alasar. But now we need to understand what Rashi does say on this pasuk. On the words ve'ela shnei Chaye Yishmael kasav Rashi, Rashi writes, Lama nimnu shneisav shel Yishmael. Why are the years of Yishmael even recorded in the Torah? Kedei liyaches bahem shneisav shel Yaakov. Only in order to teach us something about Yaakov's years. Because again, the Torah doesn't give us the amount of years that each person lived. There has to be a very important reason. We understand about Sara Imenu. We understand about Avram Avinu. But Ishmael? So Rashi says, why are the years even mentioned at all? And from what Rashi continues to say, he actually doesn't leave us guessing as to what it is we have to learn about Yaakov from Yishmael's years. He tells us we learn from Yishmael's years that Yaakov spent 14 years in the yeshivas Shem va'Ever. V'hainu, this means Shahidas HaKosov Al Dvar Mispar Shnoisav Shel Yishmael, that the pasuk coming to tell us how many years Yishmael lived. It's really not coming to tell us things or to allude to things vis-a-vis Yishmael. But it's coming to tell us important things about the years of Yaakov. V'chein lefi perish Rashi zeh. Okay, good. Okay, beseder. So it's not about Yishmael, it's about Yaakov. But still, why Shana or Shanim after each value? Ein muvan klal uklal. Lama nechtav Shana b'chol klal uklal. Why does the pasuk have to write Shana or Shanim after each value? V'zeh machrichenu lefarish l'shitas Rashi lama nechtav Shana chulei milechatchila ein akushya. So this forces us to say that again, if we are following what the Rebbe is teaching us, that Rashi is always consistent, and Rashi expects us to remember what he taught us before. So if Rashi doesn't address explicitly why the word shana or shanim follows each value, milichatchila eina kushya. It is from the beginning not a question, which is why Rashi does not have to address it. La'achar haperish b'Avraham canal. After he's taught us what he did regarding Avraham, and what he taught us about Avraham was based on the rules that he taught us about Sarah, we need to understand this ourselves. So the question is not about the Shana and Shanim, Ela Shahakushya hi lama nimnu shnaisav shel Yishmael b'chlal. Why is the Torah spilling ink on Yishmael's years? Shari ben Chamish l'mikaraya she'ein misuporim b'Torah inyanim afilu lo yodais chanoichu misushelach hatzadikim milvad ela hanoigim lanu. Because Ben Chamish l'mikra already understands that the Torah doesn't tell us things in Yanim. We don't just learn concepts, even about people that were very righteous, that were tzaddikim, like Chanoich and Misashelach. The Torah only records what is relevant to us. And so the question is, in which way is delineating how long Yishmael lived relevant to us? Va'al zeh mitaretz Rashi, shahadavar ba lelamdeinu edus Yaakov Avinu. And so Rashi answers this question of the Ben Chamish Mikra and says, let me tell you why the Torah is telling us how old Yishmael was when he passed. Because there are things, important things we have to learn about Yaakov Avinu. Aval lefi zeh muvan. But based on this, we understand, shagam b'hisafa shana b'chol klal u'klal, ein kavanas hapasuk rak lahashrei shneis Yishmael zeh lazeh. But we understand now, based on what Rashi is implying, that when it says shana or shanim after each value, it's not like in the case of Sara and Avraham, that it comes to compare the different eras or the different aspects of the principal's lives, whether it's Sarah or Avraham. Shezehu rak chidush u'mayla noisefes b'Yishmael. This would only be another overlay, because so yes, you could learn something about Yishmael's years, but the main lesson is vis-a-vis Yaakov's years. So what the pasuk is doing here is comparing every aspect of Yishmael's life to the similar years and values of Yaakov's lives. Umasha mikol mokem nemar game tel Yishmael shana bechlal, klal uklal, v'havdalas kol klal shanim la'atzmei meramezes kanal al mayus v'chidush haya etzel Yishmael b'chol echad me'azmanim elu. And while it is definitely true that the inclusion of the word shana or shanim after each value does teach us a similar thing to what we learned by Sarah and Avraham, but this is not in the main to compare the years of Yishmael, the different eras of his life to each other, and to tell us how great he was in that way, but rather to tell us something special about Yaakov. Haremes b'Torah edes malis Yishmael b'liyaches b'hem b'mailos elu. The word shana or shanim here again is not coming to tell us that we should compare the different parts of Yishmael's life to each other, but rather that we are coming to learn something special about Yaakov. And if you look at footnote 37, the Rebbe says, and now we can understand why Rashi uses the particular term liyaches, yichus, to attribute greatness rather than just to inform us, leda, which could have been something that Rashi would have written. It would have been kind of more in keeping with what's going on here. V'lilamdenu, but it's to teach us, she'etzel Yaakov hayu hashanim miyuchasos, but to tell us something very special about Yaakov's years. Hainu shamayles elu atzman hayu etzel Yaakov ba'ofen acher legamre, that all these things that we learn about Yishmael were even more spectacular by Yaakov. And the Rebbe is going to delineate this. V'abir bazeh. We're in Ois Hey. Hashinui she'ira etzel Yishmael b'Yosef ben Kuv hu shahaya kvar bal teshuva. So what's the big highlight of Yishmael when he's 100? That he was a bal teshuva. Ukedivrei Rashi b'Perush, and Rashi tells us earlier, she'Yishmael asa teshuva oid b'chaye Avram, that when Hashem promised Avram that he was going to pass b'seva tova, he was going to live good, happy years, Rashi tells us that this included the fact that he saw Yishmael do tshuva in his lifetime. V'Yishmael haya ben Peiteh shana be'es misas Avram, and Yishmael was 89 when Avram passed. Val kach meidenu Rashi, so Rashi is informing us, she'av shahaya kvar bal tshuva ad shenemar boi vayigva. In our pasuk in this week's parsha, it says about Yishmael vayigva, not vayamas. Vayamas means he died. Vayigva is the biblical word specifically for a tzaddik in passing. Lashon she'ena mura ela b'tzadikim. This is a term that's used only regarding tzaddikim. Ein lazeh, and still in all, even though we're taught that Yishmael did tshuva, and the Torah ratifies this by using the word vayigva. But ein lezeh kol erech legabe hatzidkos shel Yaakov. But this still doesn't shine a light in comparison to Yaakov's tzidkos, to Yaakov's complete piety and greatness. And then what's the highlight about Ben Shloshim? What's the greatness of 30? He koidim zman hatashus koyach ben samach ben ayin. Because 30 is clearly a time before the waning of the strength that would come later at 60 or 70. And the Mishnah says, Ben Shloshim L'Koyach. At 30, you're strong. And even a 5-year-old can see clearly that a person is at the zenith of their strength when they're 30. Move on, so it's understood. In addition to the fact that he was, in the aggregate, a very strong person, he hunted everything. But even he, who was in a global sense a very strong person, was strongest at 30. And this notwithstanding, harigam ligvuras Yishmael ein erech klal legabe gvuras Yaakov. Even Yishmael's strength doesn't hold a candle to Yaakov's strength. And Rashi comments on this in that famous, iconic scene by the well, where Yaakov meets all of the shepherds and says, wait, you guys have finished working for the day? Like, what's all this milling around the water cooler here? And they say, well, it's not our fault. We all have to wait for everybody to come, and together we roll off the stone that covers the well. That's our protocol. And yet, when Rachel approaches, the Torah tells us that Yaakov by himself, unilaterally, just took that boulder off of the well. And he did so, and he did it like somebody would pop the cork out of champagne. To teach us, to teach us how strong Yaakov was. He was 77 years old. He was coming to his 80th years very, shortly, and yet he was able to move that boulder that all the other shepherds would move together on a regular day. And okay, so we did what's great about him at 100. We did what's great about Yishmael at 30. And in which way Yaakov eclipsed both of those things. But now it gets a little more tricky, because what is the quality that we attribute to young children, very young children? The Ben Sheva move on Perish Rashi and Nali Avram. Ben Ayin Ben Hey Beloichet. We learned this already about Avram, that he was at 70, like he was at 5, bereft of any sin. Because we know that children are without sin. That's kind of a global thing. And so we might say that in this particular aspect, you cannot make a distinction between Yishmael and Yaakov. Children are children. They're all innocent. It would seem that in this respect, they are equal. They were both young children. They are equally innocent. But by giving us the age of Yishmael, and Rashi teaching us that this is just to teach us about Yaakov, the Torah is letting us know, Ein erech liyishmael legabe Yaakov. Even in this respect of children being innocent, you cannot compare Yishmael to Yaakov. Because the very essence and existence of Yaakov, is just a very different existence from Yishmael, who was Ben Ha'ama. He was the son of the maidservant. He wasn't like Yaakov was, the son of one of the imahis of Rivka. B'chol prat uprat, shayne Yaakov legamre v'hu l'mayla miYishmael. And therefore, in every conceivable way, in every facet, Yaakov is completely different and is elevated above Yishmael. V'lachein, and now we can understand Rashi's words in a whole new way. L'nemnu shnoisav shel Yishmael, koilel ha'maylos hamirumazos begimel pa'amim shana. The years of Yishmael are only enumerated, they're only mentioned in the Torah, inclusive of the extra dimensions that are alluded to by saying Shana 3 times. It's all about shining light and relating in a elevated manner to the years of Yaakov Avinu. Zipa, you wanna check the.
What? So, can you hear me?